Basic economics. How people make decisions. People face trade-offs. Have you ever heard the saying there's no such thing as a free lunch?
No, I haven't. What does that mean?
It means that to get one thing we want, we usually have to give up something else we want. This is the concept of trade-offs in economics.
Oh, I see. Can you give me an example of a trade-off?
Sure, let's say a student has to decide how to spend their time. They can spend all their time studying economics, or all their time studying psychology, or they can divide their time between the two.
I get it. For every hour they spend studying one subject, they're giving up an hour they could have spent on the other.
Exactly. Another example is how families have to decide how to spend their income. They can buy food, clothes, or take a vacation. But they can't do all three without limit.
I see. So it's about making choices and prioritizing what's most important.
Precisely. Trade-offs are a fundamental concept in economics, because they help us understand how people make decisions and the consequences of those decisions. Opportunity costs. Let's talk about the concept of opportunity costs. This is an important principle in economics that you need to understand.
Okay, I'm listening. What is opportunity cost?
Opportunity cost is what you give up to get something else. For example, when deciding whether to go to college, the cost is not just the tuition, books, and room and board.
Oh, I see. What else would be considered the cost of going to college?
The biggest cost is actually the wages you would have earned if you had decided to work instead of going to college.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. So the opportunity cost of going to college is the money I could have made by working instead?
Exactly. Even if the direct costs of college, like tuition, are covered, you're still giving up the potential earnings from a job. That's the true cost of your decision.
I understand now. It's not just the obvious expenses, but also the potential income I'm missing out on. That's a really important factor to consider.
Absolutely. Whenever you're faced with a decision, you need to weigh the benefits against the opportunity costs. It's a crucial part of making informed choices. Rational people think at the margin. Have you ever heard the term rational people think at the margin?
No, I haven't. What does that mean?
Well, it's an important concept in economics that describes how people make decisions in life.
Okay, can you explain it to me?
Certainly. Rational people understand that most decisions in life involve shades of gray, rather than being black and white.
I see. Can you give me an example?
Sure. When it's time for dinner, the decision you face is not between fasting or eating like a pig, but whether to take that extra spoonful of mashed potatoes.
Ah, I get it. It's about making small, incremental adjustments to your existing plan of action.
Exactly! Economists use the term marginal changes to describe these small, incremental adjustments.
That's really interesting. Can you give me another example of how this concept applies in real life?
Absolutely. Consider an airline deciding how much to charge passengers who fly standby. The average cost of each seat might be $500, but the marginal cost of adding one more passenger is much lower. Just the cost of a bag of peanuts and a soda.
Wow, that's a great example. So by thinking at the margin, the airline can make more profitable decisions.
Exactly. Rational decision makers take an action if and only if the marginal benefit of the action exceeds the marginal cost. People respond to incentives. Did you know that people's behavior often changes when the costs or benefits of their actions change?
Really? Can you give me an example of how that works?
Sure, let's look at the market for apples. When the price of apples goes up, people tend to buy fewer apples and more pears instead.
I see. So they're responding to the change in incentives?
Exactly. And it's not just consumers. Producers also respond to incentives. When the price of apples rises, apple orchards will hire more workers and harvest more apples, because the benefit of selling them is higher.
Wow, that's really interesting. So how do incentives affect public policies?
Good question. Policymakers need to consider how their policies will affect people's incentives. For example, a tax on gasoline encourages people to drive more fuel-efficient cars and use public transportation.
I can see how that would work. But what about unintended consequences?
You're right, that's an important point. Sometimes, policies can have unintended consequences when they change incentives. Take the case of seatbelt laws. While they directly save lives, they also encourage drivers to be less careful, leading to more accidents.
That's really counterintuitive. How did researchers figure that out?
In a 1975 study, economist Sam Peltzman found that seatbelt laws resulted in fewer deaths per accident, but more accidents overall. The net effect was little change in driver deaths, but an increase in pedestrian deaths.